Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera and good morning. Thank you for taking time today to join us in webinar titled Leading a Post-COVID World, a Sejahtera Perspective. My name is Nurul Atika from SMR HR Group and I will be your administrator for this session. I would like to highlight a few housekeeping rules before we get started today. Your microphone will be automatically placed on mute during this session to avoid any interferences. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit your question on the chat box. All questions will be addressed at the end of the session. The slides and recording of today's session will be made available at SMR website. I am honored to introduce to you our presenter for today's webinar session. Yang Bahagia, Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak. Tan Sri started his career as academician at University Science Malaysia, where he became its Vice Chancellor from 2000 to 2011. He then left USM to become the Vice Chancellor of Al-Bukhari International University before moving to University Science Islam Malaysia to become a Distinguished Fellow at its Faculty of Leadership and Management and Chair of Islamic Leadership in 2014. Prior to joining USIM, he served as a member of the World Health Organization (WHO) Expert Advisory Panel on Drug Policy and Management from 1995 to 2010 and the WHO Scientific Committee of Tobacco Product Regulation from 2004 to 2006. He also was president of the International Association of University from 2012 to 2016. On the 1st April 2016, Tan Sri was appointed as chairman of USIM Board of Directors for a 3-year term. On 1st August 2018, Tan Sri, who was a visiting professor of IIUM between 2011 and 2013, was appointed rector of IIUM. Among the honorary awards, University 21st awarded Gilbert Medal to Tan Sri on 4th May 2017 in recognition of his contribution to education. He was also awarded with honorary doctorates for the same. He was made an honorary Doctor of Science by the University of Portsmouth, University of Nottingham, and Michaelis Rosmaris University, and an honorary Doctor of Educational Science by Istanbul Commerce University. In addition, the government of Japan, in recognition of his contribution to the academic collaboration and exchanges between the two nations, has conferred him the Order of Rising Sun, gold race with neck ribbon, in September 2019. Since 1995, Tan Sri writes weekly op-ed columns for Malaysia Daily, especially the New Straits Times. Without further delay, let us welcome Yang Bahagia Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Zul to share his thought on Leading a Post-COVID World, a Sejahtera Perspective. The floor is yours, Tan Sri.
Thank you very much, Nurul. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and a very good morning and a very good peaceful day to all of you. Tan Sri Palan, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, let me first of all welcome you to this seminar of ours, and I would like to thank the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity to speak to you on a topic which I thought is relevant for us today. But as you realize, perhaps whatever that was read by Nurul becomes suddenly irrelevant when we talk about the post-COVID environment, because under the post-COVID environment, things seems to change. Whatever was normal, whatever was good then may not be as good as what we think as far as the post-COVID environment. This is something that we have been, and I have been thinking about for quite a while, not knowing that the COVID world kind of accelerated as we moved. I have been, and I think most of you would probably know, been unhappy with the kind of things that have been happening, at least in the level of education. we need to do something more than just teach and get people employed, because education means to create a good human being, a good citizen, and a good community around us. And I think this is one of the issues that is severely lacking in terms of our university. And the post-COVID has demonstrated that is something that we need to talk about. So I have changed the title a little bit, leading a post-COVID-19, a Sejahtera perspective. And Sejahtera is something that we have built over maybe 2 decades now. Initially talking about it when I was in University Science Malaysia in the year 2002, and gradually with the help of people like Dato, Dr. Zul and colleagues, making it into something which we thought worthy of exchanging and discussing with other people around us. And Alhamdulillah, for the first time this year, we are able to launch this on an MBA course in IUM that gives us a special feeling that Sejahtera really has its home as far as Malaysia is concerned. And this is something that I will also touch as far as the seminar is concerned. I'll take about 45 minutes. Nurul has taken 15 minutes, so I'm left with half an hour. So that we can have another round of question and answers. And if I can, I'll try to be as quick as possible. So there you are, leading post-COVID-19 pandemic, a perspective. And I would just like to introduce the university, an International Islamic University Malaysia, IUM in short. I think most of you probably recognize this university in the context of its debates. I think the university is well known for its debate. We have gone very international, very global in debates and won a number of prizes. And I think this is one of the crowning epitome of this university compared to other universities in Malaysia and indeed around the world. Recently, the university has also been recognized by United Nations University as a regional center for expertise for sustainable development. And we have given a kind of a designation for the Greater Gombak. Greater Gombak means we cover the areas of Gombak, including the campuses in Kuantan, Pagoh, and Gambang. And this designation would mean that we work on the basis of sustainable development as a platform of education moving forward, bringing in the 3 things that I will talk to you about in terms of what education should be in the future, certainly post-COVID, all right? And recently, I think we have won another 8 prizes awarded by United Nations on the work that we do on sustainable development. And this, again, is a testimony of the kind of direction, or if you will, transformation that this university is undergoing, which I will share with you. Now, I would like to thank the organizers, particularly Cyberjaya University, for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about something which is very close to my heart, and I hope we can find synergy between the universities, Cyberjaya, Metropolitan, and even IUM in this particular regard. Now, let me start very quickly in trying to define what leadership is all about. I think there's a lot of things that we can talk about, but for the sake of this discussion, I just want to quote Peter Drucker, which talk about management is doing things right, and leadership is about doing the right things. Now, that very simple definition, what are we doing as far as education is concerned, and are we doing the right things? That's the first question that I would want all of us to think about. Yeah, we run universities, we do all sorts of things. Are we doing the right things? If you're not doing the right thing, then I think this whole idea of leadership, as far as Peter Drucker is concerned, is still one thing. Sometimes I think we do things right, but I don't know whether we are doing the right thing. This is a discussion that I'm going to bring to the fore for you all to consider. Now, doing things right for me is just to give a simple example. If I've got a ladder, where would I lean my ladder? There's the 4 walls in my office. Which side of the wall would I lean it? Could it be on the left? Yeah. Could it be right in front of me? All right. Or could it be on the right? right? So my choice is to where I want to put the ladder depending on what I want and what I want to see. For example, if this is the kind of view that I wanted to see, then where would I place my ladder so that I can get the best view, so that I can do the best thing that I could given the circumstances or given the scenario ahead of me. Yeah. I would also want to think of how tall or how tall is the ladder that I want to use. The guy on the left will not see very much as far as the view that I want to sort of create because his ladder is too short, right? And this is a kind of a leadership that we sometimes feel whether it belongs to the university, when the university is talking about future generation, creating the future and so on and so forth. You have a short ladder, meaning to say that as far as leaders is concerned, you don't think beyond just your environment. Yeah, if this university is in Gombak, Gombak is about the only place that I'm bothered with. The rest I don't really care. Or maybe Malaysia, or maybe Asia. Yeah, what about the global world outside is something that I don't really care as far as university is concerned. As long as I can make my money, as long as there is a business to run, I'll probably be happy, right? This lady has placed a ladder in such a way that she can see better things as compared to the guy that I was just describing before. And therefore her view and therefore her kind of a take as far as the future is concerned may be considerably different from this guy that we were talking about. Yeah, but is she well prepared for? Well prepared in the sense that if you look at the guy on the left, I do not find any other icon, but it so happened that this guy with a fire engine sort of uniform. My idea is basically, is this guy is well equipped? Yeah, it so happened that fire engine, but as academician, are we well equipped with the things that we want to do and the things that we want to see? In other words, are we in touch with what education is now and what the history of education, what will education be for the future? Yeah, how do you compare education in the West and the East? What about education that talks about sustainable development? Are we into sustainable development? This is what I mean by, are we really prepared in terms of all the scenarios that we know of what education is all about, and how then we pick and choose and say which are the ones that is really relevant, not just to us, but to the world around us. So you have the choice as a leader to lean your ladder wherever you want, but are you leaning it on the right wall so that you get the right outcome as far as education is concerned, in the real sense of what education is all about? So that's my very simple understanding of what leadership is all about and doing the right thing. So you may want to ask yourself now whether you are thinking along the same line, or are you just doing things as routinely as possible and making things as easy as possible and without looking at the challenges of education and leadership ahead of us, right? So now, as a person who is responsible, it could be a president, it could be a CEO, it could be a dean, it could be anybody in the university. I think all of us are responsible. Then you want to think, what is the right thing to do? All right. As it stands now, if I were to kind of summarize my own observation, we always take an imported model. Yeah. So then we go into many things and that will say that, well, this is a university that we want. And the model is always an imported one. It comes from the US, it comes from the UK, it comes from anywhere. Yeah. And all this then becomes a kind of a one size fits all. You open the box, you assembled it like a DIY, and hey, you got a university. Okay. So there is no local context. There is no local aspiration. There is no local values that we can be proud of. Yeah. So we compare ourselves, and we are made to compare by these ranking games. I'm totally against this ranking game for all these reasons. They give you one size. Okay, you want to be a world-class university, you need to fit into these 4 criteria. If you don't have these 4 criteria, then you're not world-class. Yeah. So when people ask me, are you world-class? And I always ask them, which world are you talking about? Your world and my world may not be the same. Okay, so why do I need to pander to your world when my world demands me to do differently? Yeah, But we are always, put into this what they call a position that, well, this university A in the US is world class, so all of us need to follow this university A. And university B in the UK is also world class. We need to follow university B, all right? But now COVID tells us there's university A and university B in this part of the world is performing the worst as far as COVID is concerned. So what does it mean to be a world-class university when the society is in a shamble, that the university do not even play a role in trying to put it right? So these are questions now becomes very clear to me as what university is all about and what is the right thing to do. I think this is a very powerful argument as far as I'm concerned. We'll go into this a little bit more. So if you want a science-fits-all university, then there's nothing to talk about, because you're just a follower. You are no longer a leader in making your university matters as far as the world is concerned. Right? So is this the right thing to do? That's a question that we need to ask. People in charge at university. This is one of the big questions that we need to settle before we go into the post-pandemic sort of era, as it were. But again, I think we are also very mindful when we talk about leadership. It is not all that easy. All right. I think people like Burns will talk, it is something that people talked about, but very few understand what leadership is all about. But this is another research, slightly dated maybe, but I think it's still relevant. If we talk about great leaders who are in short supply, you see them all around the world now. Yeah, and even the greatest economy, the democracy are failing in this. Yeah, so it says here leaders are inundated with increasing perception of incompetence, greed, and frivolity. It's okay if they do it for themselves, but it is at the expense of the governed, the taxed, and the managed. In the context of university, it is at the expense of the students, the community, and also the staff. Yeah, our university in this kind of a framework, that there is this perception of incompetence, there's greed and frivolity, and everything else needs to be adjusted accordingly. Right? So if this is the kind of assessment that is made, so we begin to see whether it is right or wrong. And increasingly, when we talk about the COVID environment, I feel this statement is almost true to its core, right? So when you talk about COVID, certainly the issue of greed, frivolity, and incompetency is lurking around it. Yeah, you can read any sort of what you call the analysis now. When you talk about COVID environment, these three things definitely is there. There's a kind of a lack of understanding of what this issue is all about, and everybody is trying to make amends of what this, and therefore you find the situation is getting worse from day to day. Okay, so it is the big issue now has been, quote unquote, from my point of view, been confirmed by COVID. I mean, probably you have a country that has invested so much trillions of dollars on armaments and trying to control the world, yeah. But those armaments now are useless because they can't even control a very minute, invisible enemy that is now attacking them almost every day. So these are issues that I think we need to come to terms with. What we think was successful, what we think was best, how do we invest our time and money, then will not be the same on how we invest our time and money, particularly in the context of education. What is education for the future? Post-COVID is something that we all of us need to talk about. As though this is not enough, we are going into another sort of a war, as it were, when we talk about these vaccines. Yeah, you're already beginning to see that the greed, the frivolity, and the incompetency are setting in. Countries that have got a lot of money, have got a lot of muscle, has a lot of power to what you call to buy and influence stuff, are doing the same thing now. So the big countries, the countries that has well-to-do, are sponsoring manufacturing of vaccines, yeah, more for themselves rather than other parts of the world. The world remains the way it is, everybody now is all talking about themselves. So this whole idea of globalization, internalization, sharing of this and that become just words. In terms of its demonstration, it doesn't happen when it comes to a crunch like this. Yeah. So these are issues that I think all of us need to come to terms with and find out whether we are really doing the right things as far as trying to lead education and to lead our university and indeed our own community in this particular regard, right? Now, why do I say so? Because these are statements that I, being a pharmacist, I still have some understanding of this, yeah. And this comes from Swiss Medic, one of the regulatory bodies which is well respected. I think Switzerland is known for its manufacturing of drugs and so on and so forth. And it talks about here the benefit and risk of COVID-19 vaccines, rapid authorization as possible, but premature vaccination. We have not heard of this word, premature vaccination, are not the answer for Switzerland. Yeah, and it says here, an emergency approval of vaccine is not a legal option in Switzerland. He's talking about these two vaccine, which is now all over the world. And to them, it is not a legal option because to them, this is what they call premature vaccination. And what do they mean by premature vaccination? In their website, here's what it says. Yeah, emergency approval for the use of vaccine falls short of regular authorization. Even in countries that possesses a legal instrument for placing them on the market earlier than usual, the investigation are still ongoing. I want to underline that. Yeah, phase 3 is still ongoing. Investigation is still ongoing. In Switzerland, there is no legal basis for the emergency use of COVID-19 vaccines, while authorization applications are still being processed. Yeah, what is Malaysia's stand on this? Yeah, in the context of premature vaccination, in the context of investigation is still ongoing, in the context of data are not well publicized, we do not understand what the data is all about. People are citing Official Secrets Act when they talk about vaccination. How can this be? Because at the end of the day, we're going to put our life on the line. If you just jab anything into my body, I will not accept it until I understand what's going to happen to my body. Yeah. So he says for conditional regular market authorization, applicant must provide sufficient meaningful data on safety, efficacy, quality of the vaccine, and answer any queries promptly given, right? And this is a kind of leadership that I think we need to exhibit when we talk about, doing things right. It is perhaps a context that is, I might have digressed a little bit, but just to demonstrate, where is the leadership in the context of trying to protect us through meaningful data, so the efficacy, safety, and quality of the vaccines are really right in front of us, so that we can really make an informed decision. Available not only in Malaysia, but in many parts of the developing countries, make me feel that as though we're going to be turned into guinea pigs very soon if we do not understand what is going on. So I think the strength of leadership in the context of, are we doing the right things moving forward as a university and certainly as leaders, right? Before this, we talk about flattening the curve, and that's because again, the discrepancy, the discrimination in the healthcare system around the world. Even in countries like US, the healthcare system in itself is very discriminatory, and therefore we invented this idea of flattening the curve, which means to say it allows other people to also have access to healthcare, not only the people above the curve will have access because they have got money, they have got prestige, they've got influence, and therefore they will be given the priority, not the people on the street, not the little people on the street, not the people that do not know what science is about, and all the things that we've been talking before this. Yeah? So how do you flatten the curve is a question of trying to how to bring back the adjustment as far as that's concerned. Now, I would like to just to demonstrate when we talk about flattening the curve, we are not talking about huge technology. We're not talking about the vaccines per se in this particular regard. We are talking about just behavioral change of washing hands, no touching of of orifice that with you, so that the virus does not get into your body. Stay home, isolate yourself where possible, okay? And later on, wearing the mask. There is no huge technology. I think there are technologies, but these are low-tech technologies in a sense as compared to vaccines and all the things that we're talking now. In other words, we as a human being, if you're well-educated, we know what the science is all about, you know what is good for you, you can already, stay away from the COVID sort of environment. Washing hands is nothing which new. I think most of us are taught to wash our hands to keep ourselves clean, although sometimes it's one thing, yeah. And you know when your hands is clean, you don't touch anything else so that it will not get affected, yeah. And you also know that you don't mix with people around, and wearing masks and so on and so forth become some of a kind of a duty that you need to follow if you're well educated. Right? And this is where I think education is important. So when you don't know, you find that everything becomes, at risk. But the moment you know what to do, and therefore the curve gets flattened by itself. But the moment you take things for granted, and then the curves will come up again. And this is what we're facing today. Yeah, the third wave, so to speak, is where we becomes negligent, where we drop our sort of guard, and therefore we are facing the same pandemic coming in a larger sense. So we also need to understand that some of the terms that we use, and this is where education, I think, is important. I just want to demonstrate that the word social distancing has been used for a long time. This university has been in the very beginning talk about physical distancing. We don't talk about social distancing. Social distancing has a different meaning. It is a word that comes during the 5th century BC, I think, when there is leprosy and people do not know what to do with leprosy, and therefore they isolate themselves. And therefore, this is what the word social distancing is come back. But it is not about isolating ourselves. It is not about moving away from the larger society. It's about making social solidarity rather than moving away from what is happening around us and isolating ourselves. Yeah? So we have disturbed all the balance that there is in the environment, okay, in terms of the discrimination and all the things that I've been talking to you earlier, and how do you then restore back this balance in its totality? In other words, not only a balance within the environment, but balance with all the services that they've got. And this is something which is not new when we go back to what I call the shared human heritage. And this is part of education. There's nothing to do with technology here. And we can see a lot of examples. If you go to countries like Japan, they've got this shared human heritage called Kizuna, where all the people, all the Japanese people understand what Kizuna is all about. It's about balance, it's about shared responsibility, it's about looking after each other, which is exactly what the COVID is telling us to do. Yeah. You go to Switzerland, you go to Sweden, you've got a word called lagom, which means the same thing. Balance, just enough, nothing extra. All right, and suddenly when you go to Scandinavian countries, they are a group of people that do not want to show off. They're very sort of modest in their way of life, and this is part of what lagom means to them, so that they can have a very egalitarian sort of society rather than this lopsided society as we see in other parts of the world. Korea has got its own terms called nunchi. Basically, they mean the same thing. Yeah. Philippines, in Cebu, I was told is a word, ugnayan, means the same thing. All right. And certainly in the Chinese culture, you have yin and yang. In Africa, you have Ubuntu. In the Middle Eastern, you have Silaturahim. These are all the human heritage that means the same thing. In other words, if we can meet together, we are having a shared heritage. And this shared heritage is the one that is going to ensure us to survive together as humanity rather than as a nation or a community or even an individual for that matter. And where is this shared heritage now? We do not need technology for this, and we are beginning to develop the same thing when we talk about Sejahtera. Sejahtera is a long word that's been used in Malaysia. We talk about Salam Sejahtera, we talk about Sejahtera Malaysia, we talk about kesejahteraan rakyat, all these things. But what is Sejahtera? Yeah, Sejahtera is this shared human heritage that we need to put this up so that we can interact with other parts of society in the same way that you will interact with, because the basis of values are the same regardless who you are, where you are, and what you are. It's all about, yeah. And this, in this particular context, we talk about not social distancing, we talk about physical distancing. In other words, we and the Japanese may be different in terms, maybe physically distanced, all right, any parts of the world. But what is important, we have got a social bond. The social solidarity is an issue that we want to bring back to fore when we talk about the post-COVID environment. How do we live in a platform that we can communicate with one another despite the distance? So it is not about social distancing, it's about physical distancing. Although we are physically separate, like now, we are physically separate, but I think there's a kind of a social solidarity, understanding that we need to protect one another and to make sure that we survive as a group or as humanity moving forward. Yeah. So we introduced this word Sejahtera. This has been, I have mentioned, talked about maybe 2 decades ago, but we find that this is a time to introduce it when we talk about the post-COVID environment, because it has a number of things that most of us perhaps are not aware of. Yeah. There's the word Sejahtera in its context of leadership as at least 10 elements. So when we talk about Sejahtera, it is not just about well-being, it's not about just prosperity, it's not just about one-liner. Yeah? As much as all the other words, Kizuna, Ubuntu, Yin and Yang, has got its own complexity, multi-layered understanding, so is Sejahtera. Yeah? And we want to introduce this as part and parcel of a value-based system that Malaysian and in fact Nusantara can adopt it. Yeah? We start off with us as a spiritual being. In other words, that is the common platform that all of us can share. Doesn't matter what religion you have got or what belief you have got, spirituality, we are the same. Spiritually, we are the same. Okay? And that's, I think, the most powerful platform. Religion tends to divide. When we talk about spirituality, people tend to come together because the values are normally the same. I mean, talk about the shared human heritage that I talked to you about. Yeah. Again, it is buffered by a psychological sort of understanding, yeah, within our physical sort of existence that backs up these spiritual values that we've got with us. It could be intellectually argued, right? There's a cognitive dimension to it. And this cognitive dimension is important because it relates to the culture and the context. The word may be different, but the cultural context often are the same. It talks about justice, it talks about values that unbiased, it talks about fairness, it talks about equity and all the rest of it, right? And this way, the whole thing becomes spiritually vibrant as a life force for us to manage. Okay? And of course, culture has its own ethical background, and I think again the ethics are the same in general terms. It is also very much connected to emotion. Now under the pandemic, we talk about mental health, we talk about social well-being, we talk about all these emotional things that we have neglected for a long time because we think we can buy or we can make emotions by doing things that people normally say that you can do. You have money, you're emotionally okay. But that's not the case now. People have money, but they are not emotionally okay. Yeah, because why? Because emotion is another sector or another subset that we need to deal with as a human being, which is connected to the spirituality of the individual. So the argument begin to see begin to present itself in a very complicated and complex way from what we used to understand as far as education is concerned. Yeah? So of course we know about the ecological dimension. When we talk about COVID is again because of we are been negligent in trying to understand what ecology is all about. When we push ourselves close to the boundaries of the animal kingdoms, and you find this jumping of species and infected by other species becomes a reality, and that later on is again because of economics. Yeah. There is economic disparity sometimes, or because sometimes we look at food as a kind of what word do I use? A cuisine that everybody wants to have, and without regard of how it comes about and how do you deal with it is an issue that eventually that the society will have to pay. Yeah. So these are the very 10 elements that I will just cursory go through, because I don't think time will permit us to go through. And if you look at this, it will quickly summarize itself into this acronym called SPICES. Yeah, and I think SPICES is just a nice acronym, because all of us know if you want to have a good balanced diet, you must have a well-balanced spice at the same time. And this is the issue that I think we want to bring forward. So we talked about Sejahtera is where society needs to focus and bring back the total balance in the ecosystem. And the ecosystem is just not us and nature, but it's us and within ourselves, within our human existence, and within us and our creator, for those of you who believe in creator. And that's what SPICES means to us, so that we can build the social solidarity in the real sense of the word. You know, no racism, no racial biasness, no economic disparities, that everybody stays on the same level, because we have got this balance and we are the same spiritual being, as I've mentioned to you about. And this is what the Sejahtera leadership is all about. Yeah, and the Sejahtera leadership, as I've mentioned to you, has now taken its own place, yeah, as part of the leadership within this university. When we just completed, I think last week, the Sejahtera leadership part of the program of MBA in IUM, and these are our students. They are the ladies there with their certificates, and I think there are 4 men somewhere at the back, and these are the instructors. You can I think recognize some of them. Yeah, for 10 weeks we went through this as a homegrown idea of what leadership is all about, given our context, given our value, and given our civilization. And we think this is the way to move forward as we talk about COVID in the context of Malaysia, in the context of Asia, and hopefully globally at the same time. The first time we are doing it, and I just want to share with you some of the feedback that the student gives us, just to give you a kind of a flavor of how the student take on to this course called Sejahtera Leadership. Yeah? One of them said, I strongly believe that Sejahtera is not only meant for a leader, but Sejahtera is a way of life. There you are. Yeah? And it's a question of sharing. The more we share, the more we know, the more we learn. Don't wait. It must start with me. I think that's the key part as far as Sejahtera is concerned. It starts with you. It doesn't start with your subordinate. It doesn't start with the government. It doesn't start with anybody else, but it starts with you. Yeah. And this is another one. We also bring people from outside. This is the ambassador of Belgium. We also got the ex-minister from Bhutan talking to us. And we have got another professor from Korea, who has done a Sejahtera Center within Korea, another story that I'll talk to you about. Yeah, and it says it's our pleasure to have other people in the next class. This class is getting more and more exciting as the weeks goes on. So that's week 3, and this is week 6. Yeah, from Ashikin. So it's a long one from another person. Just at the end of the course, Amalina writes this. It'll be not enough to thank all of us. And he says, on behalf of our classmate, we would like to express our thoughts and gratitude to the class. The Sejahtera Leadership class is the pioneer batch has challenged us to step up in our new sightful journey that they have never imagined before. Many of these are MBA students. They've got their own career to look after. It pushes us to get to know ourselves, value humans and nature, and it indeed breaks the uncommon in us. I could see the concept of experiential learning is applied to the class, where theories and facts are integrated back to our life to reflect on ourselves, the ambition to deliver and beneficial things to our community. This journey is in truth a blessing in disguise for all of us to be the chosen one. We would humbly take this opportunity to seek apologies for our wrongdoings, hurtful actions, and so on and so forth. Amalina wrote this just I think before we end the 10-week session with them. Yeah? There are 2 more that I want to share with you. It talks about, here's a Sejahtera. It talks about the Sejahtera is almost like peeling. You know, it's a layer by layer of who she is. and now she knows there's just many potential that in herself that she need to yet to be explored. Yeah, so I just need to be bold and brave to make those challenges. I'm glad that I made the right choice. Yeah, talking about doing the right things, to stay and endure the rest of the week. It is one emotional ride, but it's worth it. The class has ended. My new journey has just started. Yeah. Uh, Last but not least is another student. It is come from Libya. And he said about the same thing. For him, Libya is Sujatro is new. It's because it's not a Malaysian word, not a word that he's familiar with. But yet he says that all the Sujatro leaders and to whom did not make the attendance dinner, I would like to say Sejahtera journey will keep on going and flourishing with our supports and guide. Sejahtera will always lead us ahead. I mean, this just to give you a very cursory impression of the students who have gone through this course and understand what Sejahtera is all about in its totality, in its context, right? Rather just picking from somebody else, transformational leadership, transactional leadership, where it has its own good, but what is it in the context of Sejahtera when we talk about this model that I call one size fits all. So we have got even experiences where we go bananas. I think I remember a story by Mr. Yazdi that talks about a very useful lesson which I learned, and that's why I want to share with you, about a guru that tells to the students, here you are a banana, but your assignment is this: eat this banana wherever you can without anyone noticing you. It sounds like a simple assignment, yeah. All of them came back the next day and bring their peel and say, I've eaten this banana somewhere, nobody looks at me, except for one person, have not eaten his bananas, and everybody is laughing at him. And the teacher or the guru asked him, why are you not eating your banana? Everybody else has. Yeah? And his answer was this: I can't find a place which I can eat the banana without me watching it. In other words, are we watching ourselves before we start to watch other people? Are we leading ourselves before we start leading other people? And that is what Sejahtera is all about. It starts with us. It starts with me before I even venture to tell other people what to do. And that's the kind of humility that the Sejahtera bring in the context of leadership. The moment we are humble as an educated person, we will go far because we will continue to learn from everybody and anybody, regardless of who they are, what they are, or where they are. And that's, I think, the biggest lesson as far as this class is concerned in trying to translate what Sejahtera leadership is all about. Yeah. But very quickly, I want to again connect this to what we talk about, the social solidarity. Emile Durkheim, the 19th century philosopher, French philosopher, talks about education creates social solidarity. And ask yourself now, the university that we are running, does it create social solidarity? Because to him, the school is a society in miniature. We learn about the norms and the values of society in the school so that when we transit into society, we do not become alien to society because we know what the values and the norms and the things that we need to do in the school, which translate equally into the society. If we fail to do this in the school, then that's why we see our society is in a shamble, because our school is also in a shamble. There's no solidarity in the school because the school are compartmentalized, fragmented, divided, and use whatever words you want, but it doesn't create social solidarity. And I think Malaysia is a classical example. Okay? And without social solidarity, there's no human solidarity. And the things that we talked about do not happen that way because we are not educated for it. And solidarity for us in this context of social solidarity means it is about action rather than education. I just turn the word around C and A because it's about acting. It is not about learning. It's not just about regurgitating. It's not just about what you call memorizing. It's not just about sitting in the hall. It's about us moving out to society, contributing to society, learning from society, and also co-creating with society. And therefore, we need to move forward in this way, not the way we have done it. How do we create this shared experience, the human heritage that we talked about, And that builds the whole idea of community in an organic way. It is not something that we just define and say, this is what happens when you meet ABC. No, it becomes natural. It becomes almost second nature to us. That the idea of society becomes an organic thing that we subscribe to, and becomes a second nature to us. And how do you do this? You can only do this, yeah, if we move in the right direction. And if we talked about education in its practical sense, we talk about interdependency, that people are interdependent with one another, particularly in an environment like this. We cannot live alone. This social distancing does not work. It has to be social solidarity so that we depend on one another, all right? It has to create a unified whole, that we do not have differentiations anymore because we are one. And that's where the idea of bonding come in, later on leading to solidarity. And what does it mean? It means we go on into creating one shared value, one shared community, and certainly one shared world. And there's no way of defeating the COVID pandemic if we are not sharing enough as a group of people who are suffering the same fate and the same future without working with one another. And this is again the leadership that I want to talk to you about. Are we doing the right thing? Are we sharing enough, yeah, in the context of what we are going to meet when we talk about the post-pandemic era? As we talked about that, when we talk about sharing, we need to think of this middle path. How do you actually create a middle path so there's no extremism around the world, be it in terms of religion, be it in terms of race? There's no question of us infighting with one another, yeah, so that the world remains human, and that human world will depend on this middle path. And as Rumi has pointed out, middle is the way to wisdom. We're creating knowledge all the time. The technology is creating knowledge all the time. With these robot things, we are creating knowledge all the time. But where is the wisdom in this thing? We talk about IR, we talk about AI, yeah? We have all these robots coming, but are they bringing wisdom at the same time? Wisdom is still the domain of the human being. It's not any missions. But if we fail to translate knowledge into wisdom through education, then I think our education is not what it is meant to be. The world is grasping for wisdom, although we are drowning in knowledge, and that's why the world it is today, because education is not playing its role the way it should be. Okay, I'll just end this very quickly. This is another just roadmap. If you talk about Europe now, for those of you who want to see what's happening, Europe is already talking about well-being 2030. Yeah, it could have been Sejahtera 2030. They are no longer bothered about these numbers, the KPIs, what have you. Yeah, they want to talk about the intangible that makes a person, an educated person as a stand. People are moving away. Are we still stuck with our own model, the pre-COVID environment, or are we also willing to talk about the post-COVID environment? Last but not least, I want to end with this. Even UNESCO is talking about this. UNESCO has got a program called Education, Futures of Education, and they brought another pillar of education called learning to become. Learning to become what? Yeah? Learning to become a wiser human being. And they talk about, if you want to become, let's create our own world, the world that we want. Okay? We also want to be mindful before we create the world that we want, the world that we don't want. What is the world that we don't want? From my point of view, we don't want a weird world that is now governing us. And what is a weird world to me? It has this meaning. W to me is a westernized world. Westernized world in the sense that I'm not saying they are wrong. Westernized world when everything is defined or redefined again when we talk about the Industrial Revolution of the 1700s, 3 years ago. That's the first time education has been screwed up, and education has been transformed into a commodity that people talk about just human capital and the economics of it. And therefore, we are all tuned into an economic-centric sort of system, which is led by the industry. And now suddenly, under the COVID, the industry say, we want to close down. Yeah, We don't care about the economy anymore because we can't afford it. The tons of money that I make before, I will not feed it back to society because that's for me. And therefore, students are left in a lurch. There's no more jobs, and they're going to be into what they call permanent unemployment, which is a prediction of the post-COVID environment. So industry do not present to me as a dependable partner anymore. We need to find a more dependable partner. And what is that partner? To me, is basically the community. The community stays and the community will work with us because we depend on each other. And then again, the system is about reputational obsess. We need to go into this ranking and league tables and pay thousands of dollars just to be recognized by that group of people to say that we were world class. Yeah, but we were world class long before they understand what world class is all about. And this is the last part. It becomes very dehumanizing. To go to education today, it dehumanizes you. It doesn't make you a better human being. And look at the world today if you're still not sure whether we are being dehumanized in the context that I've been talking about. So what do we want? We want another sort of acronym, and I put this acronym as WISE, right? Because Homo sapien means the wise one. Are we really wise? That we can create wisdom at the same time. And I think that's the issue that we need to tackle. To me, wise means this. The system must be holistic. It's not just Western. It has to be Eastern at the same time. It's not just secular. It has to be religious at the same time. It has not to be dominant. It has to be indigenous at the same time. How do you put this into a package so that education becomes wholesome? It has to be inclusive. No more Black life matters. All life matters. Yeah, including animal life matters. Then the word Sejahtera will come in as the context of balance that I mentioned to you about, that it starts with me rather than anybody else around me. It's therefore to be equitable. And because of that, I think there's a kind of a resiliency in this. Whatever circumstances we are in, like COVID, we're able to bounce back because we've got the value system, we've got the actual platform to work together to handle whatever pandemic that comes around us. Yeah. So that will be the kind of conclusion that I will have. And there's a kind of leadership that I think we need to create moving forward to understand what education is all about, given the pandemic sort of era, that everything changes. What used to be good before will not be good after, because the paradigm has changed and the whole understanding of education needs to be brought back as part of a humanizing experience rather than the dehumanizing experience. I've taken more than I thought I would, but thank you very much. I will just stop there. Maybe if there's any questions, we can try to discuss it if time allows. But otherwise, I want to apologize for the shortcoming. And normally this will take about 2 hours or so. But given the circumstances, I make do with what I've got. So thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and a greeting of peace.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri, for the interesting session. We have a few questions. So
yes.
let me just raise them out to you. The first one is by Dato Jails. His question is, will society solidarity in a new normal impede progress, particularly in creative thinking among young learners?
Okay. I have a problem with the word new normal. Every time there is a problem, we talk about new things. But essentially, we have forgotten the old things. So we in this university talk about renewed normal. In other words, the values that we have got has been there for a long time. We have not used it. Yeah, the things that I've talked to you, most of you will say, what is new in this? There's nothing new in this. It was there before, except that when the Industrial Revolution comes 300 years ago, we forgot all about this because the new normal then was this weird thing that I talked to you about. Yeah, so there's nothing new per se. We need to go back to what your education used to be. And after all, education, if we talk about our part of the world, Nalanda University in the 5th century BC has talked about this thing, this very precise thing that I'm talking to you about. Yeah, the University of Karayin, 1,000 to 5,000, 1,000 years ago, talk about the same thing. Yeah, and indeed, The Harvard, the Cambridge, the Oxford takes from this model and twist it around and call it education in the modern terms. So if we go and say, look, what is new, I think we need to look back at what we have left behind and bring it back. And just, dust it and I think put it back. And that is the resemblance of what the new education, because human being has not changed. Yeah, the human being of yesteryears and the human being moving forward is the same. What we have lost in between are the values. Yeah? And the values is what I'm going to describe here in my last slide. Yeah, and how do you balance between the brain or the mind and the heart? In our system in the Eastern, we still think that the heart is a seat of intellect, not just the brain. And this is where the disconnect has been when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, we talk about the Renaissance, we talked about Enlightenment, and all these things have been useful until now, until COVID tells us this is not enough. Yeah? The so-called Enlightenment is not enlightening anymore. And we need to go back to where we are as a human person. And the new normal to me is what actually the renewed normal is all about. Thanks.
Thank you, Tan Sri. The next question is from Krish, where she's asking how to ensure well-balanced Sejahtera leadership model among teaching staff and students.
There is no easy way. I mean, this is why we put it in our MBA course, just to test it out, right? Now we have got demands from other places to introduce this. So we did it with the MBA because these are matured students, have gone through experience, they've been trained as leaders, quote unquote, on the old model, the imported one size fits all model, and they can make the judgment. And that's why I shared with you their feedback. They are not coming from a very naive sort of state that we are just giving them something new and therefore they say, well, this is what it is. They've got this the ability to compare and find out what is new. And the 11 of them tell us basically, and some of them have gone through very traumatic sort of experience within the last 10 weeks. And we thought, therefore, there is something in this that we need to explore further, and therefore we want to develop this. At the end of the day, we want to introduce it back to the education system, because the education system in this falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan talks about kesejahteraan diri. You know, I think most of you probably have not heard of falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. That shows how much in tune are we with education. Yeah, and the national education philosophy talks about kesejahteraan diri as an outcome of the education system. But the education system has been hijacked. We now talk about marketability and employability. Whether this guy is Sejahtera or not is not our business. As long as they can get employed and they can be the greatest crook on earth, that's okay. Because our understanding now is to get people employed. And we want to bring this back and make sure that the word Sejahtera in the Filsafah Pendidikan is understood the way we think it should be understood. And I think that's the way to start. I think probably it's a long way. If Jaya University want to help us, we certainly welcome partnership in this particular context. How do you quote unquote revolutionize education again? Post-COVID gives us a whole idea of what education should look like, moving. And let me also give you these examples. Yeah? As we begin to understand what the education system that we've got now, we begin to read. And I've been reading a lot of books now, yeah, to understand what is the epistemology of this Western education that we say is a good one. Suddenly we find that many of these universities, the good ones, the world-class ones, are built on the sweat and blood of slaves. Yeah. And some of these universities with good names, and those names are actually the names of slave traders. I'll give you an example. If I create a university now and give a name Hitler University, would somebody wants to come to my university? I don't think anyone, because Hitler do not represent good values. Yeah. What makes us run to this university that is now pioneered by slave traders and bring the kind of value system within that system a kind of a systemic racism that we tend to just avoid and forget about it because they are Western and they are white. I think that's the biggest question that we need to understand. And this is where I think the change is going to come from if you really want to move forward and revolutionize education. It has a whole deep history, deep, dark history that we need to understand and change education around. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Tan Sri, the next question is from me. I have a question to ask you.
Yes, please.
Right now, based on the COVID issue that we are having, see a lot of education institutions are not using the traditional method of teaching, and they're all moving into the newer methods of teaching using technology. So many institutions are investing millions of dollars into technology to go forward from now. But what are the chances that someday, if all the vaccine works and everything comes back to normal, will teaching go back to the traditional method? Will the investment be wasted? How will this look like in maybe 2 or 3 years or 5 years' time?
Thank you for that question. It's a difficult question, but my worry is now we are talking just about methods. We are not talking about content.
Right.
Yeah. It's almost like shopping. Huh? People don't go to do shopping anymore in the mall. Yeah. But they still do shopping electronically, and they still buy the same useless thing they buy when they go to the shopping mall. Nothing has changed in terms of values. I still buy the same thing, except that I buy it electronically. I still live a life which is wasteful. I still live a life which is probably unaccountable in the context of discrimination or whatever you want to talk about. The content has not changed. We are all taken up by this. Everybody talks about online education, but what is the content? The content is the same miserable old content. So we are not moving anywhere. And worst thing, all the big tech companies are taking this to make enormous profit. The first tri-millionaires, I was told, has already been created in the West. And this is a tech company. What are they selling? They're selling the same thing that they used to sell before, except now the methods has gone, overwhelmingly high. I mean, we have got here in our case also, let me cite not only others in our case also, we've got a good company, that sells rubber glove around the world. Yeah. And they make tons of money. And suddenly we found that their workers are positive in the thousands. How do you reconcile this? In other words, education has failed because we are very, very economic centric. I make my money, I make my billions. It doesn't matter what happens to the people on the street. It doesn't matter even my workers. They can be positive. Doesn't matter as long as I keep on making money. And that's what's education today. It's about making money. It's not giving people education. And these things that we think about, so we change the techniques, we change the delivery system, the content still remain the same, then I think we are not moving anywhere. And you think COVID will forgive us for this? It will not. Because unless you're not educated, you still do not know how to wash your hand. You still do not know to use the right word, physical distancing or social distancing. You still do not know why mask needs to be worn in the case of the US. Yeah, then you're going to get it. In other words, educationally, you are not moving as far as the post-COVID environment is concerned. It becomes another episode of a very dehumanized state. That sometimes, this time, our future generation will pay for it. People like me will go. 5 years from now, I'll kick my bucket and go. What about my sons and my grandsons and my granddaughters? They will suffer because we are not being responsible for the things that we ought to do. We don't have the leadership in this context that we're talking about. I hope I'm making sense, Ganesh.
Thank you, Tan Sri. I think that made a lot of sense. Thank you very much. We have one last question, Tan Sri. Question is from Danish. He's asking, what should we need to do more in order to create great leaders?
I didn't go into the slides of how to create great leaders because it will take another hour, right? If I were just to summarize, I think the world today, in terms of education or any systems, we will summarize it in our context, what we call the 4Ms. The 4Ms is about education or whatever industry. We talked about manpower, right? And education is meant to train these people, to train the mind so that they can be innovative, creative, and so on and so forth. Finally, it means what? It means technologically creative, technically creative. Yeah. So you are innovative in that sense. And why is this so important? Because it panders to the marketplace. You don't call your innovation until the market says so. Until you can make money out of it, then it's not innovation. Okay, that's the 4M that we need to contend with. Now, what is the COVID world telling us? The COVID telling us if you work just on individuals, manpower or whatever you want to call it, you will not win the game. You need to work on humanity. So it's the first H, moving from manpower to humanity. All right. If you just talk about the mind without the emotions and the feelings that I talked to you about, you will not even get it. So we need to move from mind to heart. That's the second H. All right. If you talk about just high tech in terms of machine, you will still not do it also. You can be the slave of those machines. How do you humanize the machine? So we need to talk about high touch. That's the third H. And in terms of talking about market, we need to talk about how do you actually build a human society. And that's the fourth H. So we are moving from the 4M to the 4H. And the 4H is what we need to work on. How do you bring these 4 values into education system again? And you cannot bring this until you bring a set of values. To understand humanity, you must know how to sympathize. If you do not know how to sympathize, you don't even care about your neighbor. Forget about humanity. All right? Sympathy alone is not good enough. When you can do something else, that's where we bring the word empathy. Heart means empathy. You need to be there with the people who are suffering, not just sit in your aircon room and read about poverty and say, this is the solution to poverty. You need to go there and sweat it out and understand what poverty is all about from how they experienced it, how they agonized about it. Yeah. So you need to get our students out of the classroom, go and live with them and understand what poverty is all. And I understand this when we had the Aceh tsunami. We sent our students to help the Aceh people, and they came back and say, we cannot work because there's no status quo. So how confining education is when you just narrow it down to technology. Now we need to teach them again how to survive without any technology, and there is something that we need to learn. Yeah, and that's where the empathy is. Suddenly you find your education is useless because it's a textbook's education, and textbook education from somewhere else, not even from our own community. We need to learn that. And last but not least is high touch. Is about compassion. That you do this because it's a humanitarian thing to do. It doesn't matter whether it's black or white or whatever it is. It's a human thing to do. And being doctors, I think, is even more. You don't select your patient because you are bound by helping anybody that needs your help. And so therefore, these values must come in. And how do you bring these values come in is the question that we need to ask. And we thought the Sejahtera leadership is one of those. They're not the only one, but certainly now we are changing our curriculum. We will be announcing, inshallah, our curriculum early next month. That is a curriculum what we hope it to be a post-COVID environment so that we move away from all the old things that we have done that has not delivered as far as the COVID environment is concerned. There's a whole work to do, yeah, but I don't think it's impossible because we have enough experience. It's a question whether we want to do it or we are quite comfortable with what we have got now, because that's the way things used to be and things will not change that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri. It was a very good session. And I think there's a lot of participants who are thanking you in the chat box.
Thank you, Tan Sri. This is Palan here. I really was just overwhelmed with that session. I think it's very, very valuable 1 hour that we spent with you. I think it's important that the world we want it to be a wiser world. Thank you so much, Tan Sri. So grateful.
My pleasure.
So
My pleasure, Tan Sri, for giving me this opportunity. Sorry, it becomes towards at the end of the year, But yeah, I'm glad that we have it. And we can go on talking about it. I think you are a doer, so maybe you can help us with this.
Thank you, sir.
Pleasure.
And thank you to Anaji Zul for bringing us together.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Great session, Tan Sri.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Tan Sri.
My pleasure.
And thank you, participants, for joining. Have a good New Year.
Also give me the comments which are negative comments. I would want to know some negative comments so that we can, try and see where people are not comfortable with and maybe take their point of view into consideration at the same time.
So far, there isn't any negative comments, Tan Sri.
Malaysians are very polite. There's another problem. Anyway, thank you very much. Take care. Have a good New Year and hope to meet you again early next year.
Yeah, coffee on me, Tan Sri.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Tan Sri.